Horror genre history, stars, directors and films. 1930s. Innovations in sound in film led to the first commercial screening of short motion pictures with sound, as opposed to silent film in 1923. Becoming popular in practice in the 1930s, this led to loud, grunting, groaning, howling monsters becoming popular in the horror genre. Sound added a new aspect to film and conveyed suspense on screen. Horror stories were centered on literature, using books as a source of storylines, with well-established storybook characters. Universal Studios were especially influential in horror from 1931 to 1939, impacting the horror genre with classics. These classic characters remain popular nowadays, especially at Halloween. Universal produced Dracula and Frankenstein's monster, both based around monsters. Other influential 30s films included The Mummy, a 1932 movie, and King Kong, which was created in 1933. Both have a main focus on monsters. 1940s. This was in a time of war, and Americans tended to look at outsiders and other countries as dangerous. However, eventually Americans were pulled into this war. Responding with this theme in the horror genre, people became animalistic and savage. This reflects the primal violence of war. Werewolf of London in 1935 and The Wolfman from 1941 reflect the animalistic wolf-like theme and stray from the literature material. Cat People in 1942 even uses a feline subject. 1950s. Monsters created by technology were a major theme in this time period. War had taught people that technology was to be feared, and that the more advanced the tech, the more power in the war, such as with the atomic bomb. The horror movies from this time period were for the most part, low-quality B-list movies, due to the films trying to keep up with TV advancements and technological changes in film, such as widespread colour production. Mutated monsters were a popular storyline, as evidenced in Godzilla, Them, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and The Fly. To create these beasts, studios incorporated blue screen techniques and used model form recreations with stop-motion animation. One of the most profitable movies from the 1950s was The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, 1953. Science fiction aliens were also popular on screen in the 1950s, due to the advancements in film technology and popular demand. Invasion of the Body Snatchers stated that they already invaded and asked what it really means to be human. 1960s. Those in the 1960s no longer looked at outside threats for stories, and horror was in fact rooted in reality, depicting problems in a changing world. Traditions, stereotypes, and prohibitions were brought into question. Sex and violence was featured commonly in this time period, especially by underground cinema, which dodged censorships. Two directors made their way to fame. Hitchcock directed both Psycho and The Birds in this film era, and George Romero's Night of the Living Dead spawned many sequels due to its high-quality filming, makeup, and writing, which depicted a family turning against each other when they were bitten. Rosemary's Baby begins a thread of horror movies carrying on into the 1970s, depicting the generation gap of views and families consequentially being distant. 1970s. In the 1970s, high-quality A-list movies became more common. Children became a key focus of horror in the 1970s, but had been a theme in horror since the 60s, for example, The Village of the Damned from 1960. Family became a prominent theme when the monster can be a member of your family in your own house. Society was changing, and with it there was a paranoia of the moral shift, and families' views differed from person to person. The Shining, produced in 1973, became a classic due to its cinematography and stunning special effects, and the father of the family was the monster. The Omen was a theme variation of The Shining by a different studio, featuring a small boy possessed by a demon. The Omen is often compared to The Shining, and although it is good quality, usually comes off worse in the reviews. Similarly, the monster in Alice Sweet Alice from 1976 was the sister in the family, and the popular Carrie of 1976 focused on people you can't even see anymore due to seeing them so often. Jaws was directed by Steven Spielberg and released in 1975, which, whilst not keeping to the main theme of the 70s, was extremely popular and showed how old tropes could be successful with the right directors, writers and producers. 1980s. Animatronics and liquid and foam latex advanced, meaning distortions of the human frame could be achieved to a high standard. There were full-colour close-ups and special effects unobtainable previously. The monsters, however, were similar to previous years: ghosts, were-beings and slimy organisms. For example, Alien and The Thing. 1990s. The 1990s relied on gross-out horror and gore meant to shock the viewer with hints of the thriller genre. For example, Silence of the Lambs. There were a lot of remakes, such as Dracula and Frankenstein, and sequels like The Exorcist III, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Not everything was a remake though, and the horror genre was focused on psychopaths and serial killers in this time period. There were numerous movies in this genre, such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Seven, Jacob's Ladder, and Mama's Boy. 2000s. No longer were psychopaths used in the horror genre, due to tragic and shocking events of 9/11, which hit too close to home for many viewers. Horror movies topped the box office often, and horror was more popular than ever. Death was the newest topic for the movies, as evidenced in 2000's Final Destination, whose killer has no weaknesses and which everyone will one day face. It was a form of fate. Torture porn, which means the viewer doesn't care for the character and they are tortured within the movie, was on the rise, often with graphic depictions, in 2004 and 2005 with movies such as Wolf Creek and The Devil's Rejects and The Hostel. In conclusion, these are the events that led us to today's horror movies, from the advent of sound in the 1920s to the use of special effects leading to today. Each year has added something to the mix and over time defined the genre of horror.